Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Bob Thibodeau from Seattle Jobs Initiative. I'll kind of be your MC for this session today. Welcome to the American Community College Trustees learning session. This is for SnapENT learning session, and this is our third session in the series that we're doing, the foundational series that we're doing. And this one is on assessing SnapENT funding. Again, we urge you all to ask questions throughout this presentation. You can put your questions in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and chime in and let us know you have a question. We will be recording this session. I think you probably already got the signal that we are recording it. So it'll be available for you to view later on if you want, or if there's people that you work with that you would like to view this, I'll be able to view it then. Let's see what else. Like I said, this is the third in the series, and the fourth one will be coming up on April 28th. So if you already don't have a save the date for that, make sure you do that. It'll be at the same time on April 28th, which again is a Thursday. So I think that's it as far as welcome. Hopefully everybody that wanted to be on this session is signed on and everything. I've got about 3 minutes after on according to my clock, so I think we can go ahead and get started. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Susan O'Callaghan, to get us started. Susan?
Thanks, Bob. So just quickly, we'll go over what we'll cover today. We also have some guest speakers that we're really excited to have on. So we'll start with a SnapENT funding review. So just kind of go do an overview of what SnapENT, sort of how you start assessing SnapENT funding, and then looking at how you actually get at where the opportunity is for that 50% reimbursement. We're going to go over some aspects of budgeting and billing. And then we'll kind of zero in on some elements of how to build a SnapENT budget and some general strategies. And like I mentioned, we're happy today to have Camille Vega from Truckee Meadows Community College to talk about non-federal funding. And we also have some guests, Jennifer and Kathy from the Washington State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. They serve as an intermediary for all 34 community and technical colleges in the state of Washington. And they'll talk about some strategies for budgeting as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. So just to kind of set the stage about where we're at, we've been sort of going around this Venn diagram, highlighting these four different sort of pillars of SnapENT alignment. And today we're going to be talking about assessing funds. Just as a review, this diagram shows how funding kind of gets to you as a third-party partner. It starts out in having been articulated in an approved state SnapENT plan. Once those funds are in that plan and authorized, the state agency has the ability to draw them down as they are coming through in an invoice by you, the provider. So once you invoice, the state can then access those reimbursement funds and pass them back to the third-party partner. Some other just review pieces that we've discussed, when we were talking about alignment and aligning what you offer as a college with what SnapENT offers in the way of what they call components. This chart is just kind of a reminder of how much of what colleges do, especially in their workforce areas, how much of that aligns with SnapENT. And then to remind everybody about the alignment as far as people you serve, we discussed that in a previous webinar, really, focusing on that the people you are serving in your colleges right now, your students are often SnapENT eligible. These are some of the basic criteria for eligibility, being eligible and receiving SNAP and not TANF. and being ready and able to work upon completion. So those are some of that's a key criteria for SNAP E&T eligibility. And this actually comes up when you're talking about budgeting too, because you have to consider how many eligible people you'd be billing for services. So we'll start in on talking about how to look for those opportunities for 50% reimbursement. So this diagram kind of outlines the process that you take when you're looking at finding those reimbursement opportunities. So you sort of start when at the beginning thinking about what funds are coming into your college, what funds are coming into your workforce programs. They have to be non-federal and they have to be not matched to another federal grant. So that's sort of where you start looking at what are you getting in terms of revenue. And then as you move over to the right, you start looking at what you're spending those funds on that are aligned back with SNAP E&T activities. So think back to that chart that I showed just a couple of minutes ago. Find where you're funding E&T activities that align with SNAP E&T components. And then sort of moving across, you have to then further narrow down your scope to look at where those services are attached to SNAP E&T eligible students. So this process is kind of a thought process, but it's also just a key component of how you develop a SNAP E&T budget. So this will be sort of an important process to kind of look back on when you're thinking about budgeting. So the first step, again, is looking at your revenue. So these are some common sources of non-federal college revenue that we often see available for colleges. There are a variety of different sources. These are just some of the typical ones we see. So state worker retraining dollars. I think Camille, who's our guest speaker, she'll be speaking next, might talk more specifically about what some of these look like. But others support funds that come in for low-income students. In Washington, we have what's called a state need grant. Those funds can be leveraged for 50% reimbursement, tuition set-aside resources, and other funding streams that might be coming through your state to focus on specific populations. We see a lot of funding streams that are focusing on reentry or maybe individuals who are homeless. There's some innovative programming associated with non-custodial parents and helping build up their supporting their economic mobility. So these are just some examples, and I'm going to pass it over to our guest speaker, Camille, and she's going to talk a little more specifically about how to strategize around finding available funding and sort of her example from Truckee Meadows. So Camille, I will hand it over to you. And thanks for being here again.
So as Susan had talked about, there are a lot of different funding sources that we identified and use to help our students and also under the SNAP E&T program get reimbursement. I can't see the other slide. I was going to kind of go by. If you can go back one more slide, Susan.
Sure.
Okay, so state worker retraining dollars, and of course this is specific to us here in Nevada, and at our college, your schools or entities may have something different, but I'm just going to use the examples we have. We have a state displaced homemaker program. It's kind of an archaic term, but it is used to help individuals that were the primary caregiver in the home that are now losing their financial support. It is a state program. It only provides salary. There's no funding above the salary that we can provide to students to help pay for tuition. But the good thing about SNAP E&T is that we can leverage staff time. So with the Displaced Homemaker program, it pays for an individual to provide the advocacy for a student. So if the student happens to be on SNAP and is in Displaced Homemaker, every time that advocate on campus spends with that person, we can then get reimbursed for it. It goes into the SNAP ENT pool of money for the reimbursement. And then we are able to use that to support the displaced homemaker. Okay, so we can go back and support the displaced homemaker. April, I do see your question and I will completely answer it. Which one are you asking for clarification? Is it the displaced homemaker program? Yes. So displaced homemaker, Nevada, I think there are different programs throughout the country that may be similar to displaced homemaker. It's state funded. Nevada used to be the divorce capital. Back in the day, everybody would come to Nevada because we had a quick divorce. They attached a fee to all state divorces, and it was to support displaced homemakers. And that was the funding that had started. It's still a state program. We just happen to be the entity in our area that has received that state funding. So there may be similar programs in your state. We've had a contract with the state for this program for many years, so it just was a good fit. Hopefully that answered your question. I can, based on where you're located, I may be able to do some research and find it and maybe send it to Susan who can share it. The other program we have is a legislative, again, state funded program. It is to help individuals that are leaving incarceration. We see that many of the folks that were previously incarcerated, they're handed a SNAP card on the day that they walk out of prison. So it's a very good fit for SNAP ENT to have a partnership with parole or probation, or even the Department of Corrections, or the Division of Welfare and Supportive Services state agency that you work under. Probably already has someone that goes into the prisons to help sign people up for SNAP, either them or parole and probation. And that's also a great population because they all could use employment assessment and education and to look at what their options are upon their release. We have the biggest ones are our foundation scholarships. So any scholarships that your college receives that is non-federal, which for us is pretty much everything, are all, you can get reimbursement for that as well through the SNAP program. We have that through financial aid. We call them our foundation scholarships. But on top of it, we have another program, and it's our emergency scholarships. And a lot of colleges have an emergency scholarship program. For us, again, non-federal, it's the funds are gotten through employee donations. So we use the emergency scholarship as a form of reimbursement. Again, a lot of our SNAP ENT population utilize that. There are often struggles that they have because of the lower income. So we're able to assist with that. Jacobs is another program we have on campus. These are all kind of specific. So what I would really recommend is identifying, as Susan said in the beginning too, which I think was a really great thing, is that identify the programs on your campus that work with students or individuals that have those barriers, and how are they funded? And it's just a quick question of, are you state or are you federal, or is it from a private donation? And I think work backwards from there. See who on your campus works with individuals that have barriers to education. So some of the ones that we have are foster youth, and there's a foster youth fee waiver program here that can also be used for reimbursement. We have some that are for homeless students. Those funds are used. We have and I'm going to also mention, we under SNAP ENT can support students that are pursuing their high school equivalency. That's under the SNAP ENT programs that are approved. And we have a lot of folks that come through SNAP ENT that can use their HSE. So there are other funding options for the HSE program here on our campus. And one of the things that Susan and I had talked about yesterday was, what about some barriers that students have that cannot access traditional education? So what I see often in our SNAP population is that they have student loan defaults because they were once going to school and took out student loans, and because of lower income are not able to pay that student loan. So it goes into default. So having options for that population. The other barrier that I see often are individuals that attended school, had an overpayment in federal aid because they either didn't complete the class or just never showed up, and now they owe the college for a past due balance because of their financial aid being pulled out. So also finding options for that population. What we did for those two, if it's a student loan default, many of you guys are probably aware, it's a really easy fix. It takes a couple months, the student goes into rehabilitation. But during the time they come in and until they complete their rehabilitation or their consolidation, we're able to support their education so they can get started. And we pay for that through one of the programs that we have. And if nothing else, we can support it through our SNAP E&T pot of money that we've put aside. For a past due balance with our college, there's no way for us to pay that, even with SNAP E&T funding. We've tried looking at every way to pay for it, and there really isn't. And that's where we identify other programs that are not traditional college degree programs. So for us here at TMCC, we have a program called EPIC. It's our community education. Under that, we have things like phlebotomy, certifications, CNA can be done through there. We have community health worker. These are non-credit courses that are certificate. We had it approved through our Division of Welfare Office that we can support these programs. And we identified the funding sources that support those programs. One for the community health worker, a community agency, community nonprofit agency secured state grant funding to provide tuition assistance for individuals that are interested in that program. The CNA program also gets some support from local agencies, so we're able to use that. And you can use, I have used that tuition assistance for those programs that are given by non-federal agencies as a reimbursement, because when that student comes in to meet with us, they are now a SNAP E&T candidate, applicant, person in our program. And as far as our program, how we're set up is we will still provide them with the supports that they need to pursue that program. We are here to provide them additional resources, school supplies. Some of those programs require books and they may not have the funding for that book. So we'll go ahead and cover that through our program. And I think that's probably the gist of it. I just want to reiterate again what Susan had said is look on your campus and see which programs serve these populations and how are they funded. That, what I kind of went over was dollars. Those are actual money that we spend on our participants and where that comes from. But the biggest way we get our reimbursement is through staff time. So that's where, again, you look at your college campus and identify who works with your special populations. And some of the things that we see often are disability resource students, our veteran students, our first generation college students, and there are specific programs for each of them or specific departments. So identifying who in those departments are state funded and who is the one person that you can get on your team to get reimbursement and work with those students.
Thank you, Camille. One thing I would also add too that is sometimes missed in this conversation, which is sort of it's the obvious thing, is that when your reimbursement comes back, you can leverage that again for further reimbursement. So that's also something to factor in as you grow and you grow your capacity. That reimbursement comes back in as non-federal revenue or can be treated like non-federal revenue.
Yes. We always try and be mindful of when we give this back, is it reimbursable? Because of course that's the whole goal. But Susan, again stated, the money that we do get back is unrestricted. So there are times where we're able to use that fund where no other funding would be available to a student. An example would be, we had a SNAP ENT student whose car broke down. He lives about 30-minute commute from class. We were able to purchase some car parts so he could fix his vehicle and make it to class that same day. It was not reimbursable, but it was a purchase that we found would be a necessity, and it helped support him, and he didn't miss class. So that was a good part of the SNAP ENT.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad you highlighted that story. I'm going to pause for questions from the audience, so you can feel free to type in the chat or unmute yourself if you have questions just so far in this conversation, or for Camille specifically. We can do that right now.
There were two things that we saw when we first started this program that we needed clarification on. One is WIOA kept coming up, and of course WIOA is federal. We had a nonprofit agency that received WIOA funding, and they were going to use the WIOA funding to support the SNAP ENT student, but we could not do it because the original funding source was federal. So when you look at these programs or other agencies in your community that are willing to support a student, again, being mindful of where those funds came from. Are they originally federal funds, or are they another funding source?
That's a great reminder. Any questions right now? Otherwise, we'll keep going. And if something comes up later, well, you can type it into the chat, or feel free. We'll have more time to ask questions later.
I think Sammy has raised their hand.
Camille, just for, can you hear me okay, Camille?
Yes.
Just for clarification, so no federal to federal is what you're saying, right? So if there's federal funds, you're looking only for non-federal to braid with SNAP ENT?
Yes.
Okay.
It seemed like it was not, I mean, it was going to be barrier. I was like, how do we find not? Because one of the biggest is Perkins. If only we could do Perkins. I thought the same thing. I'm like, oh, Perkins is great. But I was really surprised. What, we did is I started a spreadsheet. I just looked at every program that funds students with barriers other than Perkins. But the thing with Perkins is, I'm not sure about your school, but we do have Perkins under my umbrella. And the way we do that is the staff time. So the counselor that meets with our Perkins students is actually state funded. So we're kind of able to mesh those two programs. So no Perkins money, we don't get reimbursed for any Perkins money dollars spent, but the counselor that meets with a Perkins student is state funded. So we're able to get reimbursement on that student's time. And then Perkins does not pay tuition on our campus. So a student can be Perkins, meet with the state counselor, we get reimbursed for that state counselor's time. Perkins may pay for tuition, books, and supplies. We don't get reimbursement for that. But if that Perkins student needed assistance with tuition or transportation, like that car part, SNAP ENT can provide that part of the support.
Okay.
Hopefully that makes sense.
And then do you manually track that, or do you have a system that's sophisticated enough to track that braiding? I
track it. We looked, I looked for a lot of different databases and programs, and we use something called Airtable.
Okay.
AIR table. It is under the Google, you can get through it through Google because we use the Google Drive for everything. Okay. And I want to say it's like $10 a month per user. So I'm the only one that is actual user. Other people have read-only capability. And under that, we track everything. So I have one that has all applicants. Anybody that applies to our programs is tracked. Then we have one that we move them to once they become a student in any of our programs. And then we divide which populations the student belongs to. So we mark displaced homemaker, whichever one. And again, we have students that can be in every category, and we just figure out what they need and which funding source is the best for them. But each of the individuals under those programs, we identified state funded individuals. So we don't have anybody that sees those students that are federally funded.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Camille. If anybody has any further questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or we'll have some more time. We're going to move forward. We really appreciate you joining the conversation, Camille. So here's a slide. So when you get the slide deck, this just has Camille's just information and just kind of a reminder of what we discussed in this conversation. So when we're thinking about budgeting from sort of a broader, from a broad perspective of, if you think about one of those, like, any one of those programs that Camille's talked about, or, any one of your workforce programs, you have to identify, who's going to be eligible within that program. And this is important because you have to establish for a lot of your expenses, especially staff, there's probably going to be few staff who are only doing work with SNAP E&T eligible students. And so you have to come up with a percentage to cost allocate for their time. So this pie chart kind of shows what that could look like. So maybe, you have this program, it has a large number of low-income students who are in some sort of workforce program. You may have a chunk of them that are receiving TANF, and we know that's that's a disqualifying characteristic for SNAP E&T. And then maybe some other reasons why they might not be SNAP eligible. So you're kind of carving out who you predict to be eligible. And in the context of budgeting, you're making your best guess and your estimate about that. And when you're getting started, it might not be as accurate. You have to sort of look back at historical data to understand what the potential percentage could be. And something else to consider here is that you might have students who, when you're trying to determine your expenses based on this population, you might have students who are SNAP E&T eligible, but they're receiving some sort of federal tuition assistance like Pell or other programs. And so you have to kind of narrow down that portion of your expenses based on when they might be receiving a federal stream of funding to support their education. So because you can't include those costs into all the expenses, they can still be served under SNAP E&T and the staffing time that goes to support them and the support services, but you have to narrow out their tuition expenses. So kind of taking this chart a step further to arrive at that percentage, this kind of just shows that math problem. And then you arrive at, in this scenario, you have your sort of your cost allocation percentage for most of your expenses would be 75%. So this again comes in when you're applying cost allocation to some of your expenses. And this kind of further gets at that notion. So there's kind of two different methods for determining your expenses. You could have actual program costs. So things that are just associated with being a SNAP E&T provider and your programs that you're billing under SNAP E&T and activities that are associated with SNAP E&T, your staff who have to go to a SNAP E&T partner meeting or something like that. Those are actual costs. They don't get cost allocated. But then other things where you have a mix of eligible and non-eligible students benefiting from that service, or just, sitting in a classroom, you have to cost allocate for those expenses. So this kind of breaks those things down for you. And then another area that shouldn't be overlooked when you're considering your budget is your indirect costs. So your overhead. That is something that we encourage you to include in your SNAP E&T budget and to bill for. A lot of colleges probably, I would assume many of you have a federally approved indirect rate. And so that's an option. Well, if you have that rate, you're not able to bill for indirect costs that go over that federally approved indirect rate. So consider that if your federally approved indirect, if you have that, that's your guideline for what your indirect costs can be in SNAP E&T. If you don't have that federally approved indirect rate, you have two options. You can either cost allocate your actuals, so go in and just determine what your actual indirect rate is, or you can opt to do a de minimis rate of 10%. The 10% is kind of easy, but for most of us, that's your missing opportunity to bill for expenses that are real and part of what it takes to keep everything going. So those are some considerations and that you want to make when you're determining how to bill for indirect costs and budget for indirect costs. So I'm going to pass it back over to Bob, who's going to talk a little bit more about billing and invoicing. So, we've sort of talked about, how you kind of assess what your opportunity is for reimbursement. Now we're going to sort of talk about some considerations for billing and invoicing, and then also talk a little bit about sort of putting it all together and building out that budget. So I'll hand it over to you, Bob.
Thanks, Susan. So now we're getting to the fun part, the part where you actually get paid for all your hard work. So yeah, it's important, I think, to keep in mind that each state is going to have a billing and invoicing process that's probably going to be a little bit different. So it's always good to keep that in mind and make sure you learn what those procedures are and everything. But we did want to highlight some kind of features that we think are pretty common throughout, at least the programs that we've seen as we've seen these across the country. Most partner colleges under SNAP E&T will probably bill on a quarterly basis, but we have seen some that may do a monthly billing. But again, that's something that will be kind of worked out in your contract with the SNAP agency. And then your expenses, they should be billed during that billing period. So as they are incurred, then there'll be a certain due date the following month after that billing period that your actual invoice will be due. And then the thing to consider is that I know we get a lot of questions about whether or not because the person has to keep their SNAP eligibility throughout the period that they're covered under SNAP E&T. But there are some kind of exemptions as far as when the student's tuitions is paid up front. In other words, if you pay it at the beginning of the quarter, and that's when you actually incur that expense, then even if the student loses their SNAP eligibility in following months, then that's not money you have to give back or anything. You can claim that expense. The only thing that you can't do is if the person has lost their SNAP eligibility, let's say in month 2 or 3 of that academic quarter or semester, then you can't bill for services like support services or staff time that happens during those months that the person is not SNAP eligible. But again, the tuition, since that's paid up front during that first month, then you can still claim that for that individual. And again, like I said before, each state has their own procedures for billing and invoicing. So more than likely, they're going to have certain invoicing forms that they'll ask you to use, certain spreadsheets that they want you to submit with that invoice. So again, it's just important to keep that in mind. And learn what those procedures are for your the state that you're in. Next slide. So we talked about Pell early on, that we know that a lot of these low-income students that are going to be on SNAP are more than likely going to be eligible for Pell assistance. So you have to keep that in mind, like Susan said, when you do your budget, but also as far as funding and how you braid that funding with SNAP E&T funds, things you're going to, non-federal funding you're going to be using to support these students, and how you kind of claim that. Again, SNAP E&T cannot replace Pell. So Pell, if the person's eligible for Pell assistance, then that has to come first. But you can combine it with Pell in covering any support services or any things that like staff time or whatever that the Pell grant will not cover. And then also SNAP E&T can be a bridge to Pell. So if there's a delay in the time that the person before their Pell grants kicks in, then you can actually use SNAP E&T funding to support that student up until that point. So again, things to keep in mind about, using Pell. Next slide. So let's go into a little bit more on the budgeting process, and just another way to look at it. I know Susan showed you that pie chart before, but another way to kind of look at building your budget is looking at your first of all, starting at the top of the inverted pyramid here, is to look at your total organizational budget. In other words, all your revenue and expenses that you have coming into your college. And then you whittle that down to things you're going to, as far as your program budgets that you're going to be wanting to claim under SNAP E&T that serve these low-income students that might be on SNAP or potentially eligible for SNAP. So you want to take into account all that revenue that goes into those programs, those specific programs, and expenses that are associated with serving those participants. And then in the next level, you're going to whittle it down to the potential for the participants that are going to be SNAP E&T eligible, ones that are on SNAP or potentially eligible for SNAP. So then you're going to budget what's allowable as far as those allowable components and allowable services under SNAP E&T. Then when you get down to the bottom of the pyramid, then you're looking at taking into account again the revenue and what expenses you're going to be doing under SNAP E&T, and whittling out that part of it to put into your final budget. And again, keeping in mind, this is all just an estimate. It's your best guess, based on your past experience. And nobody's going to hold your feet to the fire to get an exact number in your budget. It's something that you look at and kind of monitor throughout the program period. And then, if you need to make adjustments, then there's a chance to make adjustments in your budget going throughout the program period. Next slide. And then kind of putting it all together again, this is just an example of what your budget might look like. Again, at the top, taking into account all your revenue, your sources of non-federal funds that you can use, potentially use for SNAP E&T. And then looking at your expenses, like your staff expenses, all the staff that are going to be either directly or indirectly associated with those programs that are going to be supporting these SNAP E&T students or participants. And then looking at the goods and services that go to support those programs that you're going to be claiming under SNAP E&T. And then any support services or participant reimbursements that you use or pay for using those non-federal funds to help support those individuals. And then again, don't forget your indirect costs. Those always get added to your budget. And the thing to remember once you get down to the bottom is when you add up all your total expenses, they can't exceed what you have for available revenue. Because again, this SNAP E&T is a reimbursement program, so you're paying for the services up front. So you have to show that you're paying for those services and everything with non-federal funds, and you have to show that you have those non-federal funds in the beginning to support the program, and back up what you're claiming as far as expenses at the end. Next slide.
I think our next slides are for our guest speaker who I don't know if
Jennifer just joined.
Oh, great.
Is Kathy
Well,
with you,
welcome.
Jennifer?
I think she's getting logged in now.
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here.
Oh, good.
Perfect timing.
All right. Well, without
Welcome.
further ado, it's perfect timing. So we're going to turn it over to our colleagues from the Washington State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. And they have been a longtime partner with the Basic Food Employment and Training Program here in Washington State. And they have some good experiences I think they can share with us as far as how they look at budgeting and funding for their BFET programs in Washington. So Jennifer and Kathy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Bob. My name is Jennifer Dellinger. I'm a policy associate for student support programs at the Washington State Board. This also includes our SNAP ENT program. And I have, let's see, I've been involved with BFET since about 2008. And since 2016, been involved as the contractor for all of our 34 community and technical colleges in Washington State. Kathy?
Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, I guess. My name's Kathy Metcalf, and I'm the program administrator for the BFET program in Washington State at the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. And I am coming up on a year working with the program at the State Board.
Awesome. Yeah, Kathy's been a great addition to BFET. She actually helped us create and establish the Able-Bodied Adults Without Dependence program when we had that in Washington State. So it's just been really exciting to watch her integrate the work and connect with all of our colleges who are serving SNAP students. So Kathy's actually going to start out the slides. Kathy, you can go ahead and just say advance next slide.
Okay, next slide, please. So Washington State offers a very unique, comprehensive employment and training services program, which includes guided job search, job training that enhances resumes and interview skills, vocational training, basic education, which includes ELA, GED, high school diploma, and then a whole series of certification programs that the community and technical colleges offer. Our 50-50 funding structure requires close coordination with state-funded programs. And the CBO partners become very important in this because it helps foster connections with our larger community to ensure we are serving our people in the most holistic way. Each agency offers unique services tailored to the community and the individual. So by working together, we understand our community needs and the employment and training options that effectively contribute to our neighborhoods. By offering unique and independent services, we are able to collaborate amongst the colleges and the CBOs and help our clients and students meet with other agencies and providing individuals with full employment and training services. And so the students or clients, depending on which side you're coming from, get positive benefits from both the college side and the CBO side. So integration is really key to the success of our program in Washington State. Next slide, please. You can see from this slide that we currently have no state funds dedicated to the program administration. Colleges have had to commit funding from their general funds to program administration during early implementation. Now it's sustained through a mix of worker retraining, opportunity grant, and BFET reimbursed funds to keep the programs running within the colleges. Washington State has worked really hard over the years to gain other state-funded resources to support BFET students to increase their program's ability to draw down federal reimbursements. So we're always looking for ways to increase our ability to receive more federal funds. We continue to work with colleges on resource acquisition to build capacity within their programs. Next slide, please. One of the things that our colleges have to do is build a budget workbook for DSHS. The college's entire budget is developed by projecting the 100% amount of local funds that they will need, but they can bill against that for 50% reimbursement. All of this must tie together into all areas of their program, including enrollment and performance measures. The workbook is completed when the colleges have set their budgets for their grant applications. This allows us to have access to their enrollment and financial reports so that we can help the colleges build accurate projections to the amounts that they will need. Throughout the year, the colleges are given opportunities to adjust their budgets through funding surveys to move and or request or return funds based on lower or increased enrollments that they have at their colleges. So if during the course of the year, they've seen a large increase in enrollment, they can request for additional funds. Where another college might have seen lower enrollments, they can return funds that another college might be able to use. Next slide, please.
I'm going to talk a little bit about leveraging funding. And as you guys have heard throughout, this key piece is the 50% reimbursement. That's how you build your program and capacity to serve. For the two areas that the colleges draw down reimbursements for, there's administration and program. And so the allowable costs for students and administration are listed on the screen. One of the key components of leveraging for all sources is it has to be tracked. And I think when I jumped on, I heard Bob talking about this as well. Original expenditures has to be tracked. You have to identify the amounts billed, which means 100% of the expenditure through whatever the supporting college's documentation is, like the budget activity, the general ledger, and at minimum needs to identify the original funding source. So whether that's an emergency assistance grant, a local foundation scholarship, those types of things, every amount has to be identified by funding source. It has to include the 100% of the amount expended. It needs to include identification of what staff and or student it was expended on, and then how much of that is being billed for. So that 50% amount that you can claim. One key thing is time and efforts. We have to collect time and efforts for all staff who are either funded in part or whole from BFET reimbursed dollars or being leveraged for 50% reimbursement. Next slide, please. We have reimbursement policies, and this is going to be key to the sustainability and growth of your program. So any reimbursements that are collected by the college have either need to be returned to the original funding source or utilized for the growth of the SNAP ENT program, whether it's administrative or direct services to students. This really means that those reimbursed funds are not put back into the college's general fund for non-SNAP ENT use. Instead, it ensures that these funds are available when other non-federal funds are not available. So sustaining program and allowing for growth. Generally, we see colleges utilize these reimbursed dollars for students that do not have access to other funds, whether that be Pell or any other local non-federal source. The other key piece of using these funds are to ensure that a student can earn financial aid eligibility again. So for example, when a student doesn't meet satisfactory academic progress and has been denied financial aid, these reimbursed dollars can support that student with whatever they need within allowable costs to maintain in school and earn back financial aid. With the leveraging of funds in the reimbursed funds policy, it's really critical to know that all your reimbursed funds are considered local, and they should be used to support program growth and support students' needs. When they're considered local, they can be expended on all sorts of different program activities and then reimbursed for again, which is called reutilization. So the key features are just understanding that your 50% drawdown are called that's those reimbursed funds. They can be expended on your SNAP ENT related activities and billed for again for a 50% reimbursement. That's where we coin the term BFET reutilization. Either way, whether our college is getting reimbursed funds in our world or they are utilizing those reimbursed funds for another reimbursement, everything has to be tracked. Colleges must identify up front at the beginning of every year if they are going to reutilize funds, and they track it and submit their tracking sheets with every invoice to the state board. The reutilized funds tracking sheets should always be an accurate account of what each college has in their actual BFET budget to expend. Colleges submit those intentions to reutilize annually, like I said, and the state board monitors their account status with each monthly invoice. Then it's easy for us to identify as year to year program funds roll over where the colleges are starting out. This also helps us figure out how to help them better project and identify expenditures for their upcoming BFET budget workbook. Next slide, please. These are very high program and policy key points that we want to share with you as a takeaway. Your 50-50 funds are truthfully unlimited as long as you have the sources available to you. 100% funds are not sustainable. They're a great asset for starting up a program, but they dwindle quickly. So establishing sources for drawdown as soon as possible will help sustain your programming. Creating a reimbursed funds policy will help ensure your program is sustainable and grows. Student recruitment is a definite huge program key. We have a reverse referral model, and we utilize connecting existing students to food assistance through different eligibility modalities. Your college or agency has to have an upfront investment. They must be committed to expending local funds on SNAP recipients in order for you to draw down and build your program. So really ensuring that they are committed to workforce development is going to be critical. And then the next and final slide is just contacts for both Kathy and I, and we welcome any and all questions.
We do have a question from the chat, and I think you might have already spoken to this, but Precious asked, do institutions need to report on where they pulled non-federal dollars from when they submit documents for reimbursement?
Yes, they roll up costs into categories for those non-federal sources, and then their internal documentation and reports must show itemization.
Thank you. Something I want to note too, just because this audience probably includes a lot of folks who are from colleges specifically, or like individually, as well as potential audience members who might represent, either a state board or similar organization, or that might serve in the same role that the Washington State Board for Community Colleges does. So sort of keeping in mind, Jennifer and Kathy represent the state board who acts as an intermediary for the colleges. And it's thank you so much for sharing your perspective, because it's really enlightening. Another thing to note is, policies that happen at the state level are going to be state specific. States have a lot of flexibility to sort of put parameters around some of these broader federal policies and how funds get reutilized, and those types of things could be specific to how Washington has set policy. They might be broader or different in your state, so something to also consider. But the model that Jennifer and Kathy have shared is in general like a very sound model for ensuring that, you know, you're staying true to kind of the spirit of this program and the intent of what reimbursement should be doing, which is building your capacity, doing more and doing better for SNAP E&T participants. So Camille has said, everything we use to support a student that is approved is submitted for reimbursement. There is a sheet that will show what is and what is not reimbursable. Yeah, and I think that's pretty standard.
I think it's in the SNAP E&T tool kit. There's a one-page document, which is so helpful. So I have that printed. Now I know, but initially I looked at that document all the time.
That, so just to note, that was taken out of the 2021 edition of the SNAP E&T toolkit. It's still probably generally consistent with how, you know, there's some good guardrails. FNS has sort of backed up a little bit and broadened sort of how you make determinations for what's allowable, sort of operating under this reasonable and necessary guideline. But I liked that table as well. It's very cut and dry.
There was another question in the chat, Susan, about is tuition fee only reimbursed at 50%? And yes, the answer is yes, it is. Unless the state has extra 100% funds that they can allocate to the colleges to use for tuition, then I mean, I would say 95, 99% of the cases it's going to be that you're using your non-federal funding that you get into your college to help low-income students, and you're paying for their tuition. You can get reimbursed 50% if they're SNAP E&T eligible.
Any other questions or comments from the audience?
I was just going to share why they're thinking about that is that over the years, as an intermediary for the colleges, we've learned how critical it is to help them understand funding priority and building relationships across the departments of their institutions. In our state, usually our student support programs sit under areas that are not located within student services. And so there's a missed opportunity sometimes to triage how to best support a student or have detailed conversations with financial aid offices about funding priorities. So as you're thinking about how this could look, bringing those folks in at an early start is critical.
I'd be curious to ask the audience if you, you know, after hearing what you've heard today and just so far, you know, have the wheels started churning, or can you, are you starting to kind of visualize what, you know, programs within your college or specific funding streams might be available to do this work? Is it starting to come together? If anybody wants to share out sort of their thought process on that, or where you're seeing dead ends where you might want to ask more questions and better understand what the opportunity could be.
This is Karen Recchia from Bossier Parish Community College. This information is extremely helpful. I think where we are right now is we're trying to figure out if this is something that we can do, if we have the funding up front. At the beginning right now, our enrollment is down. And so that certainly affects our ability. But this is something that our chancellor is really interested in and wants us to do. And I know we have, I believe, a couple of colleges, or at least one in the Louisiana Community and Technical College System, Louisiana Delta. So we have a meeting with them next week to kind of see how they do things as well. So right now it's a very much a learning process for us, but it's an amazing, I see what Camille said, it finally made sense in 2020. It's a little bit overwhelming right now because you're thinking, oh, what if I make a mistake, or what if I, do something? And I was just pulling up the toolkit to look, but I really appreciate the information. Camille, you did a great job. And so we know we have people to reach out to.
And you'll have more opportunity for, deeper dives into these specific topics and support through this cohort as we move along. So glad you're seeing the opportunity, and I think it's very normal to also be feeling like, don't know how it's all going to come together just yet.
Exactly.
You might think about doing kind of a pilot. In other words, look at, one or two of the programs in your college that maybe you can just start with a small cohort of people and just kind of test it out to see how the process works and get used to it and everything before you start, scaling it out.
Right. And Nicole Braxton with LCTCS just posted that 2 of our colleges are participating, and funding is the biggest hurdle for us right now. Yep. Funding up front.
Right.
That is the biggest hurdle.
If it may be helpful, we have developed at the state level a couple of documents that we could share with you guys to help you have those funding conversations at the colleges around priority and what needs to be first in, what can be leveraged. Of course, it's going to be specific to Washington State, but it may help you guys think about building a tool of your own to identify resources and using them as a desk aid to have those funding conversations.
It'd be great if you could share that, Jennifer. Go ahead, Susan.
I was going to say, we would be happy to pass along those types of resources and share with this group. And again, the TA that you'll receive, I think that's where you can, use some of these tools that might come from other locations, but then you can get help kind of seeing how you can apply those things where you are.
We got a comment in the chat saying Louisiana Delta Community College does a fantastic job of partnering with industry partners for funding opportunities. So yes, definitely. Good to think about those things.
Well, we want to thank Jennifer and Kathy and Camille. Camille, we know you're playing a dual role and now more than once to share out your experience, but you're also a member of this cohort. So thank you for doing that. And thank you, Jennifer and Kathy, for joining us. in your busy schedules, and providing this example of from Washington. It's always great to call on our local state as an example.
Yes, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
And I think on that last slide, Susan, we do have those links to the toolkit and the Snap to Skills website, where there's a lot of good resources. So again, want to call your attention to that.
I just wanted to say, I really like what Bob had said about when you start your program, to start with maybe one small program that you have. We did that. That's how we started in 2018. We started with one program, our manufacturing program, and it was an open entry online. We received state funding through the governor's office for economic development for that one program. And that is all we did, probably the first year. And we had maybe at most 20 students at a given time, but it was good. It was one small program that we focused on, and we had state funding for it. And it was really helpful, as Bob said, to really kind of get our feet wet and start learning and seeing what we could do. And then once we had that, we could then expand.
Well, if there are no more questions, we will let you all have some time back. Just a
Carrie,
reminder.
are you still on? Carrie?
I am.
Yeah, okay. We just want to assure folks, I know we had a question in the chat about sharing this PowerPoint. That's something I think that's going to be posted on the shared, is it the SharePoint we have for this cohort?
Yes, we will share all of the materials in the way that we always do.
Great.
Which
Great.
is my hedging, because Jose, as for attendees can see that I'm logged in as Jose, is usually the one who shares those. So I don't want to promise incorrectly, but we have recorded and we have the slide deck, and we will make sure those are available to you.
Yeah, great.
And just, you know, coming up next month, we'll have our final webinar in these sort of series of these 4 parts of the 4 elements of SNAP E&T. So we'll be talking about building capacity, I believe, on April 28th. So stay tuned for that. And with that, I think we'll say thank you, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, everybody.